Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical. Let me start with this, China M2. This is from Daniel Lacal. It's pretty extraordinary, isn't it? An off-the-charts type of chart. Sterling, last trading at 130.14. Look at that. Spiked up like crazy and then straight back down again, as everyone starts to fret that Boris is determined on a swift and probably hard exit on WTO terms. Home thoughts, it's enough for me to be sure that you and I exist at this moment. Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And then I went back to Pukul Blinky. We can all agree that zombies and mermaids are the peanut butter and chocolate of creatures, but for some reason few have contemplated the zombie mermaid. 60 hours ago in Rwanda, what a brilliant planet we live on. Let's all work together in 2020, David Yarrow. Venice, Italy, Porta della Carta, entrance to the Doge's palace last night. It dates to 1442, 50 years before the discovery of America, C.S. Dickey. And then that took me back to the time when Venice was flooded. The high tide, worst high tide of its history since the terrible Acqua Grande of November 4, 1966, which had caused the city irreparable damage. And I concluded the tide is high, the end is nigh. But fortunately it wasn't, otherwise Christopher Dickey would not be visiting. Wasini Island, which I haven't been to for many years, lies in southeast Kenya, 3 kilometers off the coast of the Indian Ocean, 75 kilometers south of Mombasa, and opposite the harbour of the village Shimoni, which has a dark past. Shimoni, it's where they held slaves before they transported them. Wasini Island has a population of about 3,000 living at the south coast in the 2 villages Wasini and Mikwiro, respectively at the west and the east side of the island, and inland in the hamlet Nyuma Maji, which means in Swahili behind the water. In Wasini village in Nyuma Maji live the Bantu people, the Vumba, whose mother tongue is the Swahili dialect Kivumba. In Mikwiro, the Kifundi, the Shirazi, have their own mother tongue, the Swahili dialect Kikifundi. Well worth visiting, and this is a photograph from Kenya Pics taken by Anna Samchuk. The beach is calling, unbelievable crystal clear waters of Wasini Island. When we visited, we met dolphins on the way to the island, and Ali the navigator took us to Wasini Island. And this is a lovely photograph by Faith Kanja. You never get tired of Wasini's sunset views. It is not true that people stop pursuing dreams because they grow old. They grow old because they stop pursuing dreams. And then a passage from his book, Love in the Time of Cholera. To him she seemed so beautiful, so seductive, so different from ordinary people, that he could not understand why no one was as disturbed as he by the clicking of her heels on the paving stones, why no one else's heart was wild with the breeze stirred by the sighs of her veils, why everyone did not go mad with the movements of her braid, the flight of her hands, the gold of her laughter. He had not missed a single one of her gestures, not one of the indications of her character, but he did not dare approach her for fear of destroying the spell. Political Reflections, The Privacy Project, 12 million phones, one data set, zero privacy, New York Times, every minute of every day, everywhere on the planet, dozens of companies, largely unregulated, little scrutinized, are logging the movements of tens of millions of people with mobile phones and storing the information in gigantic data files. The Times Privacy Project obtained one such file, by far the largest and most sensitive ever to be reviewed by journalists. It holds more than 50 billion location pings from the phones of more than 12 million Americans as they move through several major cities, including Washington, New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. One search turned up more than a dozen people visiting the Playboy Mansion, some overnight. Without much effort, we spotted visitors to the estates of Johnny Depp, Tiger Woods, Arnold Schwarzenegger, connecting the device's owners to the residences indefinitely. You've probably never heard of most of the companies, and yet to anyone who has access to this data, your life is an open book. They can see the places you go every moment of the day, whom you meet with or spend the night with, where you pray, whether you visit a methadone clinic, a psychiatrist's office, or a massage parlor. One thing is certain, we are living in the world's most advanced surveillance system. Pankaj Mishra, who I think is a fabulous writer, has written about a global anarchy revival could outdo the 1960s in Bloomberg opinion. India has exploded into protests against a citizenship law that explicitly discriminates against its 200 million strong Muslim population. Narendra Modi's Hindu nationalist government has responded with police firing on demonstrators and assaults on university campuses. The global wildfire of street protests from Sudan to Chile, Lebanon to Hong Kong, has finally reached the country whose 1.3 billion population is mostly below the age of 25. The social, political, and economic implications couldn't be more serious. It was only last month that students on the campus of Hong Kong Polytechnic University were throwing petrol bombs at the police and fielding in turn tear gas, rubber bullets, and water cannons. That acknowledgement of the state's authority as the ultimate arbiter is now rapidly disappearing in not only Hong Kong but also India and many other countries. It is being replaced by the conviction that the state has lost its legitimacy through cruel and malign actions. Then he goes to compare today's protesters with the French students who erupted into violence amid a global escalation of street fighting. They claim to reject an older generation's values and outlook, and they too couldn't be simply classified as left-wing, right-wing, or centrists. The commonplace pejorative confuses anarchism with disorganization. It should be remembered that anarchist politics is one of the modern world's oldest, if little remembered, political and intellectual traditions. Today it best describes the radical new turn to protest worldwide. Anarchist politics began to emerge from the mid-19th century onward, originally in societies where ruthless autocrats were in power, France, Russia, Italy, Spain, even China, and where hopes of change through the ballot box seemed wholly unrealistic. But unlike socialist critics of industrial capitalism, they aimed most of their energies at liberation from what they saw as tyrannical forms of collective organization, namely the state and its bureaucracy, which in their view could be communist as well as capitalist. This is a very powerful quote from Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, the pioneering thinker of anarchism and robust critic of Marx, who said, "To be governed is to be kept in sight, inspected, spied upon, directed, law-driven, numbered, enrolled, indoctrinated, preached at, controlled, estimated, valued, censured, commanded by creatures who have neither the right nor the wisdom nor the virtue to do so." It was an existential experience instantly available to individuals by jointly defying oppressive authority and hierarchy. This is also how protesters today seem to perceive democracy as they struggle without much hope of any conventional victory against governments that are as ideologically driven as they are ruthless. Let there be no doubt, more open and unresolvable conflicts between ordinary citizens and authorities are likely to become the global norm rather than the exception. Certainly, militant disaffection today is not only more extensive than it was in the late 1960s, it also connotes a deeper political breakdown. As angry, leaderless individuals revolt against increasingly authoritarian states and bureaucracies, from Santiago to New Delhi, anarchist politics seems an idea whose time has come. I told you it was good. I've written about this severally. In that article, The New Economy of Anger, I said this phenomenon is spreading like wildfire, in large part because of the tinder-dried conditions underfoot. I said prolonged standoffs eviscerate economies, reducing opportunities, and accelerate the negative feedback loop. I said this is a revolution and it's a global phenomenon. I quoted Kapuscinski, "If the crowd disperses, goes home, does not reassemble, we say the revolution is over." And I'm saying it is not over. More and more people are gathering in the streets. The Indian historian Ram Guha is seen mid-interview being detained by police. This should not happen in a democracy, to a serious, rigorous historian and public intellectual, William Dalrymple. Here, this via ANI, Delhi's students and other people of Muslim community offered namaz outside the gates of Jamia Millia Islamia University. Members of other faiths formed a human chain around them. And as I said, unless we're now going to Xinjiang the whole world, the current modus operandi is running on empty. And this is the politics of ethnocratic nationalism. This is a turning point, feels like the beginning of a new emergency, William Dalrymple again. I wrote about Kashmir, if you're in Kashmir, which was described by Nehru as the snowy bosom of the Himalayas and which is currently switched off from the 21st century. And apparently it's now almost 140 days, no broadband, no SMS, no mobile data. It's a hermit kingdom, isn't it? Economic growth in India has now fallen for 6 consecutive quarters, and I go back to that advisor to the Indian government who called it, India's great economic crisis. GDP figure is the weakest recorded under Prime Minister Modi, who first swept to power 5 years ago, promising to take India's economy to new heights and create millions of jobs every year. Associated Press, protesters in Arab world's newest uprisings face a long haul. The sustained leaderless protests are unprecedented and have managed to bring down the governments of both countries, but they've been unable to topple their ruling systems. The same politicians have kept their hold, wrangling and stalling over forming new governments and ignoring the broader calls for radical reform. The protests reflect a broader malaise playing out across much of the Arab world. As the Middle East ushers in 2020, experts say a new kind of uprising is unfolding. While the 2011 Arab Spring uprisings that took place in Egypt, Tunisia, Libya and Syria were directed at long-ruling autocrats, the current economically driven uprisings are directed at an entire class of politicians and a system they say is broken and has failed to provide a decent life. The politicians' corruption has stolen and ruined the future of our youth, reads a huge banner in Baghdad's Tahrir Square. It's a sentiment that sums up the feeling across Iraq and Lebanon. Mako Watan, he said, a colloquial expression for this is not a country. Samar Malouli, a 32-year-old Lebanese protester, calls her country's politicians monsters. On the one hand stands a young generation demanding good governance, an end to corruption and socio-economic progress and justice. On the other sits a corrupt and sectarian political class, backed in key ways by Iran, that doesn't want to give up any of its positions or riches. This is a one-way street, he said. It's either us or them. If they win this time, it's over. In this November 4th, 2019 file photo, anti-government protesters set fire while security forces fire live ammunition and tear gas in Baghdad. As Paul Virilio refers, the revolutionary contingent attains its ideal form, not in the place of production, but in the street, where for a moment it stops being a cog in the technical machine and itself becomes a motor, a machine of attack, in other words, a producer of speed. Let's move on to the international markets. The gap between the US 2-year and the 10-year yield is now the widest since November 2018. You will recall when it was practically inverted, and I wrote an article, Bond Yields in Tilt Mode, and I said the recessionary signalling of the yield curve should be discounted. Essentially, that has proven correct. The volume of negative yielding debt has dropped from 17 trillion to 11.5 trillion. Dollars could fall further after Sweden's Riksbank has ended the negative interest rate era. 24th of June, I called it a Wizard of Oz world. This is voodoo economics. And just because we have not reached the point when the curtain was lifted in the Wizard of Oz, and the wizard revealed to be an ordinary conman from Omaha who has been using elaborate magic tricks and props to make himself seem great and powerful, should not lull us into a false sense of security. Ghosts of rate cycles past is Raoul, who's comparing the post-3-cut pullback in Eurodollars in 2001 versus the post-3 cuts now. He says it's a stunning fit. I think the risks are that it works the other way, that the economy in the US blows very hot. Let's go to currency markets. Euro dollar 111.17, dollar index 97.426, Japanese yen 109.37, Swiss franc 0.9789, the pound 130.17, the Australian dollar 0.6891, India rupee 71.1655, South Korean won 1161.735, Brazilian real 407.05, Egyptian pound 16.0473, South African rand 14.26, dollar index 97.422, rebounding. Big driver has been the sell-off in sterling. Goldman Sachs on Netflix. We continue to believe that consensus expectations for Netflix subscriber growth and related financials in 2020 and beyond are too low. As pricing stabilizes, competitive concerns prove overblown, growth continues to benefit from investments in content, and cash flow turns positive. We expect shares of Netflix to continue to outperform. We remain buy rated with a $400 12-month price target. My price target is considerably above that, 500, because I think the market got overly concerned about the competition. I think the competition is a damn squib, and I don't think they have the experience to challenge Netflix. Closed at 332. Next stop is 350, 360, and then 400, which could happen as soon as January. I wrote about Netflix in that article, Streaming Dreams, Non-Linearity in Netflix, and I put out a conviction buy on the 23rd of September at Friday's closing price then of $270.75. Tesla just about done on the upside with D-Mark sequential on day 12 of 13, Tommy Thornton. The short squeeze is obviously ending because if you look, all the shorts have capitulated, have been vaporized by Elon Musk. Commodity markets, gold, where is that? 1478. WTI crude oil trading at the highest level in 7 months at $61.12. I was bullish about that. At the same time I wrote that article. It was called Streaming Dreams, Non-Linearity, Crude Oil and Netflix. Clearly what the cryptocurrency community needs is a bad fruit harvest to lift prices. This is Tracy Alloway and the Bitcoin avocado correlation, which I'd actually written about in an article called The Crypto Avocado Millennial Economy. And I said the zeitgeist of a time is its defining spirit or its mood. Capturing the zeitgeist of the now is not an easy thing because we're living in a dizzyingly fluid moment. EM Equity Volatility Index VXEEM closed at the lowest level since late 2017. Should we price risk EM risk this way? Go figure. The marketeer. That took me back to the story about the Kingfisher and the Hallison days, which is from Latin Alcyone, who was the daughter of Iulius and the wife of Sikhs, and when her husband died in a shipwreck, Alcyone threw herself into the sea, whereupon the gods transformed them both into Hallison birds, kingfishers. And then these became known as Hallison days, when storms do not occur. And essentially, with volatility right down there, we're in this moment, Hallison moment. Today, the term is used to denote a past period that is being remembered for being happy and or successful. Trade, Trump and protests, a guide to the main emerging market risks in 2020. This is from Paul Wallace. A jump of almost $3 trillion in stock market valuation this year, currency volatility at a 5-year low, and bond spreads at their narrowest level in almost 2 years. Never mind country-specific issues such as rising defaults in the Chinese domestic bond market, slowing growth in India, and the deepening crisis of South Africa's state power company, Eskom. The US-China trade dispute and Brexit dominated and drove markets in 2019. My view is that the US-China trade dispute is now in a truce period, which is good for risk assets. Brexit, well, it's probably still going to be a hard Brexit. David Wu, the Bank of America strategist, who a year ago said he wouldn't touch emerging markets with a 10-foot pole, this year will be about the dissipation of these policy uncertainties, and this should provide a boost to global growth by releasing pent-up demand as companies rebuild inventory and resume capital expenditures, he says. The outcome of the US-China trade war is crucial to the outlook for emerging markets in 2020. Couldn't agree more. Extra yield investors get when buying sovereign dollar bonds in emerging markets rather than US treasuries is already at the lowest since April 2018, with the gap falling below 300 basis points this month, according to JP Morgan. In 2020, anger against governments will not go away, said Citigroup. Politics will matter much in LATAM and will drive much of the trading around the region. Sovereign defaults have been rare in emerging markets in recent years, but in 2020, more countries could join Venezuela, which defaulted 2 years ago. Markets are most nervous about Argentina, Lebanon, and Zambia. Zambia's Eurobond yields have climbed to almost 20% amid a slowing economy and worsening power cuts. Investors say it probably needs a bailout from the IMF, though the government seems reluctant to accept the conditions that would come with that. Speaking about that China-EM correlation, I wrote about the feedback loop phenomenon on the 13th of August, and I said China has exerted the power of pull over a vast swathe of the world over the last 2 decades. We can call it the China-Asia EM and frontier markets feedback loop. This feedback loop has been largely a positive one for the last 2 decades. And I was saying we've got to keep a very close eye on that. I think we're seeing some relaxation in that feedback loop. It's been positive for 2 decades, slightly negative, and now I think it's going to be positive again. The extent of China's importance for the rest of the developing world can be seen by the way the non-Chinese emerging currencies track metals prices. This is from John Althers. The relationship is far tighter than that with US interest rates. For emerging markets, we have perhaps already reached the point where China and its banking regulators are more important than the US and the Federal Reserve, which is a good point. Soldiers from the Central African Republic, CAR, who were trained by Russia, sing the Russian Soviet military song, Katyusha. That's from Ali Oskok. And have a look at my article on the 28th of October from Russia with Love, which also touched on Putin's recent re-engagement on the African continent, of which CAR was the first. Murder has become an official policy of the government, says Tanzanian opposition figure Tundu Lissu to the New African magazine's Thomas Collins. On September 7, 2017, leading Tanzanian opposition figure Tundu Lissu was shot 16 times in Dodoma while waiting in a parked car outside Parliament. Lissu says the event marks a turning point in Tanzania's history, whereby the ruling party and its leader John Magufuli are beginning to use deadly force as an official policy. Hours before the event, Magufuli was hailed as an anti-corruption crusader. Upon entering office in 2015, announced on local television that those who betray the government's economic policies will not survive. Something like this has never happened before. Such a spectacular assassination has never been a part of our politics, Lissu told New African from Belgium, where he has been receiving treatment. He's a member of the main opposition party and will throw his weight behind Chairman Freeman Mbowe whom he expects will lead Chadema in the upcoming contest. I would describe the opposition as bruised and battered, but not dead and out of the contest, he says. With stronger underground networks, Chadema will likely join forces with the rising ACT Wazalendo party, which enjoys strong support in Zanzibar. I frankly don't believe that CCM, as it now is capable of ceding power peacefully through the democratic transition of power, he says. They will send in the army, they will send in the murder squad. Though these objections led to an attempt on his life, the Chadema politician continues to argue that the prime beneficiary of Magufuli's anti-corruption and resource nationalism drive is the president himself. There isn't a single case which has been concluded. Those in prison are told to either pay up or continue rotting. It's extortion, plain and simple. This is not economic nationalism. This is state-orchestrated extortion. What he has done for the past 4 years is run an extortion racket, going after the business community, local and foreign, shaking them down and making them pay money. If they don't pay, the government will seize their assets and freeze their accounts. Barrick had to pay because they had no choice. That's what I said. They had already invested hundreds of millions of dollars. With Magufuli in office, not one serious company will invest in Tanzania, he adds. Building an airport in his own village, Lissu accuses Magufuli of acting like one of Africa's most infamous despots. We have a regime which claims to be against corruption, but if you look closely enough, it is more like Mobutu Sese Seko of the former Zaire. The army chief, the chief justice, the attorney general, the solicitor general, the chairman of the electoral commission, the auditor general are all Sukuma. Everyone is from that region. There is a point beyond which we cannot be pushed, he says. Elephant dung is fueling South Africa's gin boom. Sales have jumped by 54% in a year. You might think that elephant dung is best kept away from gin, which most people find tasty enough served with tonic water and a slice of lime. Not so, say Paula and Les Ansley, South African distillers who infuse theirs with pachyderm poo to capture the textures and flavours of the African bush and sell it for $46 a bottle. Indlovu gin may be aimed primarily at those with an adventurous spirit, but it is only the latest splash of ethanol on a market that has caught fire. In Veroche, one of the pioneers of South Africa's craft industry, uses fragrant fynbos shrubs. It makes 18,000 bottles a month and exports to 17 countries. The first is that gin is becoming more popular everywhere. Consumption increased by 8% around the world and 52% in Britain in 2018. I never liked it, but now I must say I do. This is a late evening encounter with elephants at Mazima Springs, Savo West. Maybe I should have collected their poo, made some gin. Ramaphosa South Africa reported a minus 0.6 Q3 GDP decline. He was awarded the Grand Croix de l'Ordre National du Mérite on behalf of the Grand Master. And I still can't get over that. President Alpha Conde of the Republic of Guinea. Fitch has affirmed South Africa at BB+, outlook negative. South African all shares up 9.14% year to date. Dollar Rand, which broke big resistance at 14.50, is now at 14.2564. Egyptian pound at 16.0446. EGX 30 is up 6.15% year to date. Fitch has revised its outlook on Nigeria to negative, affirmed it at B+. Moody's downgraded Nigeria to negative in December, and we learned that foreign investors are propping up the Naira to the tune of $16 billion via short-term certificates. And I wrote then, everyone knows how this story ends. When the music stops, everyone will dash for the exit. And the currency will collapse. The Nigerian All Shares down 15.42% year to date. The Ghana Stock Exchange is down 10.14% year to date. Nairobi All Shares up 15.8% year to date. NSE 20s down 9.45% year to date. And then let me leave you with this. Usher in 2020 at the Khalifi New Year, a contemporary African alternative and electronic music festival from 30th December to the 2nd of January, according to Nomad Magazine Africa. Sounds fun. Thank you for stopping by. Wishing you a great weekend.